Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to present to you a man whose great learning and veneration for truth are only exceeded by his high moral character and his majestic presence. I refer in these vague and general terms to myself. I consider introductions unnecessary, but if it is the custom to have them, I prefer to do the act myself, so as I can rely on getting in all of the facts. I was born modest, not all over, just in spots, and it wore off. I got into this habit early in my career when I was introduced to a frontier audience by a miner. He introduced me by saying, "I don't know anything about this man. Leastways, I only know two things about him. One is, he's never been in jail. The other is, I don't know why." I was once introduced to an audience by a congressman who had the habit of shoving his hands down in his pockets while he talked. You know the type. He introduced me as Mark Twain, a humorist who is really funny. A very rare creature indeed. Why, I was struck speechless by this complimentary thunderbolt. I had scarcely in my lifetime listened to a compliment so beautifully phrased, or so well deserved. But we had in our presence a much rarer creature than a humorist who was really funny. We had a congressman who kept his hands in his own pockets. Well, I want to thank you for attending the services this afternoon. I nearly missed them myself. I came by railroad. It was one of those trains that gets tired every 15 minutes, has to pause and rest for 3/4 of an hour. One of the passengers advised the conductor to take the cowcatcher off the front of the train and move it to the rear, because at the rate we were going, we weren't going to catch any cows. However, there was nothing to prevent them from climbing aboard on the rear end. Well, when I was a young man, studying for the gallows, I went west on the overland stage. I started in Virginia City, in the Nevada Territory, which was a good place for a man to lose his religion. If he had any left by the time he got there, there were wide open gambling places, murders, street fights, riots, half a dozen jails, a dozen breweries in full operation, and some talk of building a church. It was no place for a Presbyterian. And I did not remain one very long. Well, I eventually went on to San Francisco. Now, I was looking for a job out there in San Francisco, but I was very particular about the type of job I'd get. I didn't want to work, so I became a newspaper reporter. I hated to do it, but I couldn't find honest employment. And I've often had to serve time that way. When I was putting together my first book, I did a stretch in Washington as a newspaper correspondent. And every day I went over to the Congress, that grand, old, benevolent National Asylum for the Helpless. And I reported on the inmates there. Well, it was very entertaining. I had scarcely in my lifetime listened to a body of men with promises so handy and information so uncertain. Why, these men could talk for a week without ever unloading a useful idea. Listen here, if one of those men had been present when the deity was on the point of saying, "Let there be light," we never would have had it. But I think we have every right to boast about our Congress. I think I can say, and say with pride, that we have legislatures which bring higher prices than any in the world. It could probably be shown through facts and figures that there is no distinctly native criminal class in America, except Congress. Now suppose, just for a second, suppose you were an idiot, right? Now suppose you were a member of Congress. Wait a minute, I just repeated myself. Yes, it bothers me. It certainly does bother me that there's thievery in Washington. It bothers me more that there's cowardice. Because a coward and a congressman is much the same thing when it comes to taking a moral stand. Before taking a moral stand, he takes the temperature of public opinion. And the politician will bow to the temperature of public opinion every time, just as long as he can keep his hand in the public till. I once observed an animal perfectly designed for politics, the chameleon. Not only could this animal change its color as the situation warranted, it had two eyes that moved every which way, like pivot guns. The eyes worked independently of each other. Each had its own exclusive machinery. It gave him a most congressional expression. One eye on the constituency and the other on the swag. Well, when I was back in San Francisco, that winter I went up into the mountains to hunt for gold, and I didn't find any gold. But I did hear Jim Blaine tell the remarkable story of his grandfather's old ram. Now, Jim Blaine had the kind of memory that was so good, it defeated his every attempt to march a straight course. You may have known a Jim Blaine in your life at a time or two. You may be a Jim Blaine for all that. Well, Jim Blaine, as he would tell his story, would always get further and further away from his grandfather's remarkable adventure with the ram. So I found him sitting on an empty powder keg, smoking. I said, he had his hand raised to command silence. Well, sir, I don't imagine those times will ever come again. Well, sir, my grandfather got that old ram from a fella up in Siskiyou County, and he turned him loose back home in the meadow. And next morning he went down to have a look at her and accidentally dropped a 10-cent piece in the grass and was a stooping over, fumbling in the grass to get it. And the ram was up the slope taking notice. But my grandfather wasn't taking notice because he had his back to the ram, don't you see? Well, now, Smith of Calaveras was a-standing there. Wait a minute now. It weren't Smith of Calaveras. No, he was a Baptist. No, it was Smith of Tulare County. Of course it was. I remember it now, perfectly clear. Well, Smith of Tulare was standing over there. And, Smith of Tulare was standing over there. Wait a minute. Smith of Calaveras was a Baptist. Wait a minute, the ram was up the slope. Well, grandfather was right here, fumbling in the grass. And when the old ram see him in that attitude, he took it for an invitation. And here he come down that slope, 30 miles an hour, with his eye full of business. Well, now, you see, my grandfather's back of being to him, and him a stooping over like that. Why, of course, why, so it weren't Smith or two Larry standing over there. No. Why, it was Smith of Sacramento. Why, Smith of two Larry was just a nobody. But the Smiths of Sacramento, the Smiths of Sacramento come from the best blood in the United States. Why, there was never any better blood south of the line than them Sacramento Smiths. One of them married a Whitaker. What do you say to that? Elmira Whitaker. There was a girl for you. Just as sweet and generous and lovely. Why, if she had a thing and you wanted it, you could have it. Have it and welcome. Why, she had a glass eye. And she used to lend it to Flora Ann Baxter, who hadn't any to receive company with. Well, now, Flora Ann was pretty large, and it didn't fit. It was a number 7. It was a number 7, and she'd been excavated for a 14. So that eye wouldn't lay still, don't you know? Every time she'd wink, it would roll over. Oh, it was a beautiful eye, and set her off admirable because it was painted a lovely pale blue on the front side, and it was gilded on the back side. Didn't match the other eye, which was one of them browny, yellery eyes, sort of tranquil and peaceful, the way those kind of eyes are, but that was all right. They worked together just fine, and plenty picturesque. Well, when Flora Ann come to get excited, that handmaid eye would take a whirl and go on a whirl and then start flashing, first blue and then yellow and then blue and then yellow and then blue. The other eye would stand perfectly still, looking at you like a spyglass. Grown people didn't mind it too much, but it most often made the children cry. Kind of scary, don't you know? Flora Ann tried packing it in cotton, but that didn't work. The cotton would work loose and stick out both sides. And look so kind of awful that the children couldn't stand it no ways. And she was always dropping it out and company and turning that empty eye socket on people. So somebody would have to hunch down by her good ear and shout out, "Your game eye is fetched loose again, Miss Flora Ann, dear." And then you'd have to sit and wait while she jammed it back in. Wrong way out is a general thing.